with the Marshall Plan and the return to growth after World War II. Here it is, and it's this that I call, as in the title of this lecture, the long disrupted wave. Because if you get what I'm trying to explain, that there's a pattern to these 50 years, that they're never the same, but there is something discernible, there's an up and a down, and there's a driving force, and if you buy the idea that we can compare the up and down flow of the Industrial Revolution with the up and down flow of post-1945 world economy, then there's something that strikes you. It's really easy to fit the beginning to the pattern. The Marshall Plan, the write-off of debts after World War II, the long boom that follows, the deployment of technology, not hard to explain, and it's not actually just automobiles and aircraft. It is, even then, computers and calculating machines and modern medicine and modern mass higher education that I think is technological in this sense. It is contributing to growth. It reaches its kind of, hold on a minute, everything's not quite right phase at the moment when probably some of you went to university, the older ones in the room, or became politically active, the 60s, when in this country you started to get stop-go crises, where you couldn't maintain growth because inflation kept eating the growth. We all know what the inflection point was, what was the point where good turns bad, where the old world, which just seemed to be so untroubled and free of problems, suddenly turns into a big nightmare, is the early 70s. Because you get this, the recession, the oil shock and recession of the early 70s. And from then on, those of us who lived through it, and I see one or two of my colleagues here who did, you know, when you've seen a party political broadcast done by a man with a candle in front of him, because the lights have gone off, you have no problem with the idea of a downswing of capitalism. Okay? Crisis of the 80s. The attempt to solve the problem of profitability we all discovered in the 70s by suppressing the bargaining power of organised labour. All understandable. That it's all going well for my schema until 1989. Because in 1989, things get suddenly a lot better for capitalism. And indeed, the wave is disrupted. After 1989, the size of the global workforce doubled, according to Harvard economist Richard Freeman, from 1.5 billion, largely located in the developed world, to 3 billion people located in the developed world, but also China, Russia, and then the newly emerging, what we call now the emerging markets. The people doing waged and salaried labour for a capitalist firm, the number of them doubled. And according to Freeman, that reduces the ratio of capital to labour by a third. By a third. Immensely empowering. Whatever's happening, whether it's in Wolverhampton or Lee, where I come from in Lancashire, or Shenzhen in China, wherever, it just immensely empowers capital over labour. And what has started as a kind of wish and a hope and a prayer under Thatcher and Reagan of being able to lessen the bargaining power and wage power of organised labour suddenly becomes very easy. Because, like in the factories on the edge of Nairobi, there's a bench with 5-10 guys sitting there in the sun, twiddling their thumbs, picking their nails. That bench is not put there out of philanthropy. It's put there so that if you don't work hard enough, there's always 5 guys sitting outside the factory who want to do your job. During this period, after 1989, GDP per capita rises. The 104% I've quoted there is for the whole period after 73 to today. But by contrast, the discovery of the Americas probably raised GDP per capita in the 16th century by about, for the whole century, by about 14%. And according to the Gresham lecturer Douglas McWilliams, who lectured on this last year. And during the Industrial Revolution, during the sort of 60 or 70 years of the Industrial Revolution, in the developed world, GDP per capita in the world probably rose by about 30%. And then the 30 years we're talking about, this is a different order of magnitude. We get the financialisation of capitalism. We get the globalisation of trade and manufacture. It's a disrupted wave. It's not going bad at all. It's going incredibly well. And then, of course, it does fall apart. So why? Now, for those of you who've been sitting up there, especially about our colleagues at the back who are, veteran lefties, and thinking that in some way you're just listening to a Soviet economist acolyte, I am also, quite a big follower of the argument that says this: the way, the escape route, what disrupted the wave, what made the wave go up, down, and then back up again, is this. We call it fiat money, and as soon as you hear the word fiat money, what you expect to be seeing is a right-wing economist in a suit. Because that's who's obsessed with fiat money, people who think that it is a crime and a tragedy and indeed a mortal sin to print money. Okay? Because fiat money is money created by central banks and banks. And you couldn't do it when you were on the gold standard, but good old Richard Nixon got the world not only off the gold standard, but off currencies pegged to the gold standard when he unilaterally abandoned the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1971. And since then, central banks and banks have been able to create money for free on an unlimited basis, and that's what they've achieved. That's the estimated global monetary aggregates. I know it says source www.dollardays.org, but until recently, nut jobs were the only people who were interested in this. I don't say they are nut jobs, but people on the edge of economic discourse. You won't find many graphs like this in the Bank of England. So I won't bother you with money 1, money 2, money 3, money 0, but basically that big green bit is the bit that is the money created by banks by just writing a new line in their Excel spreadsheets. Now, go back a bit. If I'm saying the wave's disrupted, that's the down bit. This is where you're expecting the down bit to get worse and worse and worse, but instead, okay, so just a little bit of Inspector Morse here. Here's a bit of evidence that I might be right, because at the moment we expect it all to go wrong, a massive sort of double paddle to the heart of capitalism comes on by the quite rapid expansion of the money supply globally. But if you look at the top bit of that graph, it's really interesting because it's actually the last 10 years where the real disruption takes place. I love doing this, but are there any nurses in the audience? Any doctors? Any medics? Any medics at all? Ambulance people? Anybody interested in earthquakes? Seismologists? Yeah. Nuclear inspectors, people who can work a Geiger counter. We've got 1 or 2 people who can read a graph in real time. Okay, now you're a nurse, there's your temperature chart, okay? You're going, right, what are you going by the time at the end of this? You're going, hold on a minute. Slow down, guys. Something's wrong with this patient. Look what keeps happening to them. This is the amount of financial profit in the USA as a percentage of the domestic profits. And in the era of Doris Day, it's a nice, respectable 15%. And the era of Lady Gaga, it's nearly half of all profits are financial. USA household debt to GDP. The trend line, Kondratyev's not the only one who uses trend lines. The blue line is the trend, the yellow is reality. And you know what? In 85 to 93, that yellow divergence, we call things like that unsustainable booms, bubbles, okay? That was terrible. Then, in the last 10 years, we unleashed that. That's the subprime boom. The trend line of household debt to GDP goes way, way off trend. This is a signal, nurse. Again, this patient is not quite right.